Good afternoon. Thank you guys for coming. This is obviously to talk about the tragic deaths that occurred on Nob Hill Court of 5 victims on Saturday night. Saturday night, about 3:26, officers received a check the well-being call on the 2600 block of Nob Hill Court. When they arrived, officers made entry into the house and discovered 5 victims that had been killed inside the residence. The victims ranged in age from, there were 2 adults and 3 children. The youngest was 6 months old, a 5-year-old, and a 6-year-old were found inside the residence. Detectives responded to the scene, immediately began a homicide investigation, and they identified Mr. Martin Martinez as a person of interest in the homicide. This was based partially on his past relationship with Amanda Cruz, who was one of the victims inside the residence, and he was also the father of the 6-month-old child that was found deceased inside the residence. As part of the investigation, detectives began attempting to locate Mr. Martinez and sent out information to other law enforcement agencies that he was a person of interest in this case. Back to another case involving Mr. Martinez, which may be tied to this. In October of 2014, Mr. Martinez was listed as a potential suspect in a crime report involving the death of a 2-year-old, Christopher Ripley. Christopher sustained head injuries while Mr. Martinez was watching him alone at his residence. Christopher was taken to a local hospital and then taken to Madera for those head injuries, where he passed away 2 days later from those injuries. Based on the number of victims we had at the Nob Hill location, as well as the information from the prior homicide that we'd received earlier that week, on Thursday we'd gotten information from a neuropathologist, specialist who we had sent to assist with the autopsy of Chris Ripley for the October homicide. On Thursday we got a verbal notification that she determined, or her findings were, that Chris had died as a result of a homicide or blunt force trauma, not by an accident. Based on that information and the fact that we needed to identify or locate Mr. Martinez, a Ramey warrant was issued for his arrest. Mr. Martinez was found in San Jose at about 1:05 in the morning, Sunday morning, coming out of a movie theater with his father. At this time, or at the time of the verbal notification of that homicide, the death certificate had not been completed, as that was still an ongoing investigation as well. Department of Children's Services had stepped in to protect Mrs. Cruz's other children in between the time of the death of young Christopher Ripley and this incident. And I'd just like to thank the Department of Justice Forensic Services Bureau for their help. They had a forensics team respond to the scene and help us with forensic evidence at the scene, do collection of forensic evidence, and they're in the process of processing that evidence as well. Our detectives are continuing to do interviews and to determine exactly what occurred at the Nob Hill residence. We're also looking to make sure that all of those victims find justice, whether that be Mr. Martinez being responsible or ruling out that anybody else could be possibly responsible for that. So in closing, I'd like to extend my condolences to the family and friends of the victims of this horrible crime. And with that, I'll take a few questions.
Chief, it took 9 months to, it seems like 9 months passed from Chris Ripley's death to the verbal word that it was blunt trauma. What took 9 months to get that? And you got that word on Thursday, the 16th. This new murder was on Saturday. When did you put out the warrant for his arrest? On that Thursday?
No, and actually what took 9 months is, as many of you know, homicide investigations do take a great deal of time. You only have one shot at making an arrest or making that case, so you want to make sure that you do that properly. With the 9 months, part of that was hiring a forensic analyst to do additional testing on Christopher Ripley, and so sometimes that just takes time. The verbal notification was on Thursday. The Ramey warrant was issued Saturday night after Mr. Martinez became a person of interest in this homicide. And that was so that we could ensure that he was taken off the street and did not disappear while we were looking into this homicide.
Why not issue right from Thursday when you knew it was blunt force and he had already been a suspect?
At that time, there was no indications that there would be any violence within that family. There had been no calls for service at that location. It is believed that Mr. Martinez and Ms. Cruz had continued a relationship. In fact, the 6-month-old was their child. And so the verbal notification is not the final report. It's not the final coroner's report. It's also not the final report from that pathologist. So there was still some investigating or paperwork that needed to be done before that case was filed. We actually sped it up on Saturday night when Mr. Martinez became a person of interest in this homicide.
Chief Carroll, with all due respect,
Yes.
did the police department drop the ball on this one? Mr. Martinez was a suspect in this 2-year-old's death, and for 9 months he was allowed to still have continued contact with this family and these children. Could all of these individuals' deaths have been prevented?
Absolutely not. The Modesto Police Department did not drop the ball on this. Like I said, when it comes to homicide investigations, you only have one shot to make your case. And there's much more than just the police department that's involved in criminal investigations. We put together a case. There has to be enough probable cause to arrest that individual. And then there has to be enough for the district attorney to be able to file charges on that case. So, no, the police department did not drop the ball. It is horrible that this tragedy happened, but there are no indications leading up to that time that anything like this would occur.
As a follow-up question, have you guys identified a motive perhaps for this set of crimes, and does it have anything to do with the forensic specialist's report having come out 2 days prior?
We have not established a motive at this time, and we have spoken with the coroner's office. My understanding is very limited people knew that verbal report came out from that specialist, so we do not believe that played a factor in this incident.
Can you talk about the children and what their connection was? We've heard some speculation that one of the children in the house was maybe just there for a sleepover and not related.
That is the case. One of the children was there, not for a sleepover, but was dropped off that morning to attend an event with the family.
And who was the other adult?
The other adult is Anna Brown Romero, age 57, and she is Mr. Martinez's mom.
He said CPS got involved. He said CPS was involved with the other children, but
Correct.
Martinez was still living at that house. So what exactly did CPS do?
I can't answer that question. They did enforce those orders in the last at least 2 months. He was not living at that residence any longer. When it comes to what was done before that to enforce that order, I can't answer that question.
Do you know how the people were killed, and was there any indication that any of the women tried to protect the children?
I'm not going to answer that just because we're still in an active investigation. Obviously, I do know, but it's just not something I want to answer because we're in an active investigation.
Can't say whether it's gunfire or some other.
I'm not going to at this time.
We have time for 2 more questions. Alejandra, did you have something?
Yeah, it was the same question.
Okay.
Thank you.
2 more.
How long were the bodies, were they dead? And how long did it take before police found them?
The officers responded to the Nob Hill Court address after some of Ms. Cruz's friends went there because she didn't show up for a lunch date. And so it was not a long period of time.
I know that Ms. Cruz had other children. Were there any other children that were in the house that survived or were outside of the house but have survived, and are they now with CPS?
There were no survivors inside the house.
Was that last child related or not? With that last child
The children, one was Mrs. Cruz's daughter. The 6-month-old was again a child of Mrs. Cruz and Mr. Martinez. There was another, I believe, 5-year-old, which was a family relative, more of a distant relative of the family.
And the fourth?
There were 3 children and 2 adults.
I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
This concludes our press conference for today. Any further updates on this case will be available through social media. Thank you all for attending.
We all have additional questions. Are you